Dracula, the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, Frankenstein, all names synonymous with Universal's classic movie monsters. These titans of cinema reigned supreme over the cultural zeitgeist of America during the early 30s to mid 50s. And one of those standout hits would come in the form of 1932's The Mummy. With the discovery of King Tut's tomb 10 years prior still within the minds of the public conscious, Universal set out to make a movie that would both frighten audiences and just maybe give themselves another horror icon that they could use for future projects. In spite of mixed reviews, the film made enough at the box office to be considered a success, and indeed did go on to create an unofficial Mummy sequel film in 1940 called The Mummy's Tomb, which subsequently kicked off its own two sequels called The Mummy's Ghost and The Mummy's Curse respectively. After watching the original for the sake of this video, the film is definitely a product of its time but set the standard for the IP going forward. There were a couple more low-budget mummy films made during the 60s by Hammer Film Productions, but nobody really cares about those, so in essence, the mummy was put back into its proverbial sarcophagus until it could be properly resurrected to wreak havoc on the box office once more. And boy did they come back with a vengeance. Complete reboot of the franchise, director Stephen Sommers came out swinging with his rendition of The Mummy in 1999, very loosely based on the OG Mummy. Meant to breathe life into the property, the film made over $415 million at the box office on an $80 million budget. In time, it spawned two sequels, a spin-off movie with its own sequels, a couple of video games, an animated series, and even an additional reboot in 2017. As a kid, the first two films in particular are what sparked my interest in Egyptology. They're the reason I had so much adoration for the overarching plot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shout out to all my Horus players. They're the reason I know every word to the Prince of Egypt by heart, and even as an adult, my love for Egyptian lore is the reason that I will defend Stardust Crusaders from criticism with my very life. These films helped fill a void not only left by previous Mummy movies, but a void left in the wake of the Indiana Jones films as well. Around that time, they weren't really making too many fun adventure movies anymore, so The Mummy stepped in and completely reinvigorated the genre. At the time, critics were pretty meh on the 1999 release, but audiences, including myself, ate this movie up. I've got plenty to say about The Mummy and its sequel, so I guess it's time for another retrospective. If you're a returning viewer, then you already know the vibes, but if you're new here, we're gonna go movie by movie in order of release to see what really made this franchise tick. And I'm gonna mispronounce some names, so just bear with me. That being said, Universal will almost certainly copyright claim this video like they did the last one, so shotgun blast the like and subscribe buttons for me. Get yourself some chips, some pop, cause
here we go again.
All the kids in the marketplace say, walk like an Egyptian.
Is he supposed to look like that?
No, I've never seen a mummy look like this before. He's still...
Juicy.
Yes.
After sitting on the character for decades, Universal greenlit a Mummy reboot in the 80s where it sat in development hell, getting passed around to various directors and screenwriters until finally landing with Stephen Sommers in 1997. Sommers had a couple of films under his belt like the 1994 Jungle Book and The Adventures of Huck Finn, but most of his early career was spent as a writer. He had never been in the driver's seat for a project of this magnitude, but Universal believed in his vision enough to let him take the wheel. Wanting it to be more adventure-oriented as opposed to pure horror, Sommers cast Brendan Fraser as leading man Rick O'Connell after being impressed with his performance in George of the Jungle. The principal cast being rounded out by Rachel Weisz as the hopeful Egyptologist Evelyn, John Hannah as her shiesty brother Jonathan, Oded Fehr as Magi leader Ardith Bey, a nod to Imhotep's alias in the original film, and the titular mummy himself, Arnold Vosloo, as Imhotep. Vosloo and producer James Jack had previously worked together on Hard Target, so when it was time to cast the most important role in the film, Jack knew exactly who to call. Because a large portion of his part in the film was CGI, ILM used a combination of prosthetics and motion capture to bring Imhotep's rotting corpse to life, so to speak. But before we can talk about his resurrection, we have to talk about his death. The film starts off in the ancient city of Thebes, when we find High Priest Imhotep in a secret tryst with one of the pharaoh's concubines, Anck-su-namun. She and Imhotep love each other with a passion but aren't allowed to be together because the pharaoh wants her all to himself. After having their affair uncovered, Imhotep and Anck-su-namun murder him, but before they can flee, the pharaoh's bodyguards, known as the Magi, attempt to storm the chamber. While Imhotep manages to get away, Anck-su-namun buys him time by killing herself, knowing that Imhotep can resurrect her. He does make an attempt to do so in Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, using the fabled Book of the Dead. However, the resurrection ritual is interrupted by the Magi, who take Imhotep and his priests captive, and Anck-su-namun's soul remains in the underworld. For his blasphemous murder, Imhotep is given the Hamdai, the worst curse an ancient Egyptian could have received, one so bad that it had never even been attempted before, and with good reason. The victim would have their vital organs removed and placed in jars that were then put into a chest bound to their soul. Should anyone given the Hamdai be brought back from the dead, they would be bestowed with the immortality and the power of the 10 plagues of Egypt once fully regenerated, ushering in the apocalypse. Flash forward to the almost modern day of the 1920s, we find Rick O'Connell preparing for a battle with the French Foreign Legion at his side in the ruins of Hamunaptra. After some fancy gunslinging, eventually he's overrun. Rick tries to make a retreat but is abandoned by his comrade Benny and left to be killed by the enemy. Before they can finish him off, they realize where they are and run away out of fear of the curse. Rick then begins to hear whispers and voices before the sand starts to shift on its own and form what looks like a face. With no transportation, Rick is left to wander the desert under the watchful eye of the Magi and their leader, Ardith Bey. Now, we see a lot of different romantic subplots throughout this franchise, but the bromance between Rick and Ardith was one that I thought was worth mentioning because, honestly, I'm just a sucker for a good bromance. So we transition to Cairo 3 years later, where we find Evelyn, who's a bit of a mess working at the Cairo Museum, and Jonathan, who brings her an ancient artifact in the hopes that it's worth a lot of money. Realizing that it's an ancient puzzle box, Evie solves it and finds a map to Hamunaptra inside. They bring it to the museum's curator, Dr. Bey, where he dismisses their claim of the map's legitimacy and accidentally sets it on fire. Confessing that he actually stole the puzzle box off a drunk man, Evie and Jonathan go to ask him where he acquired it, where they find an incarcerated Rick. Seeing straight through their nonsense, Rick agrees to take them to Hamunaptra if they can get him out of jail because he's set to be hanged, sealing the deal with an impromptu kiss. Evie attempts to buy Rick's freedom, but the warden isn't going for it and commences the execution. Okay, so to pause for a sec, early in Brendan Fraser's career, he did a lot of his own stunts like this one because he was young and hungry and wanted to prove that, no pun intended, he could hang with Hollywood A-listers in terms of performance. He accidentally really did get choked out during the scene, but thankfully was revived by the crew and even continued doing stunts during the film. These stunts resulted in accumulated injuries over the course of years and ultimately led Fraser to having several surgeries, including a back operation, to relieve pressure on his spinal cord. These injuries and surgeries ended up being significant factors in his phasing out of Hollywood. We in the public didn't even know about them until recently, so while rewatching these films, I had a whole new appreciation for Fraser and think he deserves to be mentioned among some of the great stuntmen of the industry like Jackie Chan or Tom Cruise, but we'll get to Tom Cruise later. Anyway, Evie strikes a deal with the warden to set Rick free for a percentage of any treasure they might find at Hamunaptra, and the warden obliges. Now a free man, Rick shows up with a shave and a fresh cut and really catches Evie's eye. Of course, the warden has to tag along because why not? Taking a riverboat to the city, Rick meets a group of Americans who also happen to be looking for Hamunaptra. I don't care to look up their names, but they're basically the Three Stooges, so we'll call them Larry, Curly, and Moe. Later, Rick shows off his arsenal to Evie and goes over his previous experience in the city, genuinely believing that something sinister and cursed is lying just beneath the sand. Being a cynic, Evie brushes it off as drivel but is hoping to recover the Book of Amun-Ra, an ancient tome full of Egyptian incantations. She thinks this discovery will finally earn her the respect of her peers in Egyptology. Still wondering about the spontaneous kiss, Rick confesses to Evie that he did it because he thought he was about to die, which upsets her and causes her to storm off flustered. Her dynamic with Rick throughout this film is very reminiscent of the dynamic popularized by Han and Leia from the original Star Wars trilogy, and it's a proven formula that Hollywood still pulls from to this day. For whatever reason, the gunslinging scoundrel and high-strung princess works, especially when you have copious amounts of chemistry between actors of this caliber. Rick then discovers his old comrade Benny spying on him, and as it turns out, he's the one leading the Three Stooges to Hamunaptra, hoping to score some of the treasure for himself. Not forgetting that Benny left him for dead, Rick throws him overboard as retribution for his abandonment. Not only is Benny the personification of a weasel, he's also evocative of a theme throughout this franchise. That theme being that, with the exception of Jonathan, who has comedy relief plot armor, cowardice and greed don't go unpunished.
You know, nasty little fellows such as yourself always get their comeuppance.
They do?
Oh yes. Always.
Meanwhile, the Magi have been stalking the boat and sneak aboard looking for the map and a key. Rick bursts in and turns the boat into a shooting gallery, causing a fire. During that shootout, we get this comedic yet accurate depiction of peak American yeehaw culture, which is
Americans.
With everyone abandoning ship, Rick's group and Benny's group end up on opposite sides of the river, and the race is on to Hamunaptra. After traveling through the desert, the groups arrive at the same time to catch the sunrise, revealing the camouflaged city of the dead. After setting up camp, Rick's group heads down into the ruins below the statue of Anubis. While searching for the Book of Amun-Ra, they accidentally stumble onto a sarcophagus in the ceiling. They notice that the key to unlocking it just so happens to fit their puzzle box. Meanwhile, the warden is snuck off by himself to search for some treasures and finds a wall of what seems to be rare stones, but in reality are flesh-eating scarab beetles. One gets inside him and works its way up to his head, causing him to go running in pain and crash to the wall head first, instantly killing it. Elsewhere, the Three Stooges have their diggers attempt to open a hidden compartment for treasure when they accidentally set off a booby trap and get sprayed with pressurized acid. So far, both groups have proven that the curse rumors might be true, much to Evie's irritation. Later that night, the camp is attacked by the Magi, attempting to forcefully remove the treasure hunters. In the fray, Rick and Ardith come face to face and begin to fight. The two lock eyes for the first time after 3 years, the spark of the dynamite indicative of the explosive spark between them. I cannot with this bit. Anyway, Ardith warns them to leave or die, which of course they ignore, citing that there must be something down there worth protecting. And there is, just not in the way they expect. The next day, the Three Stooges manage to pull the chest from the wall, and despite the inscription warning them not to do so, they open it anyway and discover the Book of the Dead and the sacred jars. Downstairs, Rick's group use the key to open the sarcophagus, where they get a Five Nights at Pharaoh's jump scare from the corpse of the long-dead Imhotep. Evie realizes that he was buried alive via Hamdai, and inside they see a message left by the High Priest stating,
Death is only the beginning.
That night she sees the Fourth Stooge with the Book of the Dead and steals it later on using the key to open it. She's been a skeptic throughout this trip, so the threat of a curse isn't enough to stop her from reading the incantation inside, inadvertently resurrecting Imhotep. With his revival, Hamunaptra is almost immediately engulfed with a pestilence of locusts, causing the groups to go running inside the ruins. In the chaos, Larry has his glasses stepped on and is left behind and alone, with Imhotep stalking in the background. As a person who can't see a thing without his glasses, I can confirm that this is some scary shit. Rick's group runs into a horde of scarabs and has to take off but gets separated when Evie falls through a trap door. On the other side, she finds Larry, who's had his eyes and tongue stolen by Imhotep. He looks at Evie and mistakes her for a Noxuna Moon, but I guess that's what happens when you take a blind man's eyes. Rick catches up and gets spooked by the Walking Dead corpse but shoots him to escape. Outside, Ardith and the Magi are waiting, where they once again tell the group to leave. Back inside, Benny is still trying to get out when he runs right into Imhotep. He's about to be killed when he pulls out a Star of David in prayer, which Imhotep recognizes as a symbol of the Hebrews, sparing Benny, but making him his servant and demanding the location of the other sacred jars. In Cairo, Rick and Evie argue over whether or not they should do something about Imhotep. He wants out while she thinks they should take action. Despite being dubious about the curse, her encounter with Imhotep makes her a believer, meaning that the apocalyptic prophecy is imminent. Having made his way to Cairo with Benny, Imhotep finishes his consumption of Larry and hunts for the other Stooges. His presence in the city causes the plagues to go off as he begins to regenerate, looking more and more like William Afton in the process.
Oh my god!
After eating lead from Rick, he's only scared away by a cat in the room, who he views as a guardian of the underworld. They go to the museum to get some answers from Dr. Bay and find that Ardith is there waiting. The two reveal that they're a part of an ancient secret society sworn to keep Imhotep from returning, and piece together that the mummy views Evie as the human sacrifice needed to revive Anaxunamun. Knowing that Imhotep will be looking for Evie and everyone who opened the chest, Rick assigns Curly and Mo to protect her while he looks for the fourth Stooge. However, Imhotep gets to him first and sucks him dry in front of a crowd of people and steals the Book of the Dead. After that, he moves on to Curly and he gets sucked drier than the Sahara Desert before sneaking into Evie's room for a smooch. Thankfully, Rick shows up with the cat and gets him to scram. Evie reasons that if the Black Book can bring him back to life, then the Gold Book under the statue of Horus should be able to send him back to the underworld. However, they don't have a lot of time to plan because Imhotep has turned the people of Cairo into mind slaves and sixed them on the group. They get in the car and have to drive through the civilians GTA style just to get to safety, but lose Mo in the process. After getting cornered, he comes face to face with Imhotep and dies about how you would expect.
Sucking them dry, that's how.
And that's a wrap on the Three Stooges. Type F in the comments to pay your respects. After crashing the car, the survivors get surrounded, but Evie gives herself up as long as Imhotep agrees to spare them. Benny steals the key from Jonathan, and then Imhotep immediately walks back on his word because, of course, that's what he would do. Dr. Bay sacrifices himself to buy Rick, Ardith, and Jonathan time to escape into the sewers, knowing that they're the only hope to stop Imhotep and is overwhelmed and killed. The next day, they meet up with one of Rick's old buddies, Winston, to grab a plane in the hopes of catching up with Imhotep, who's dragging Evie back to Hamunaptra for the ritual. Winston starts a trend in this trilogy of Rick's old military friends swooping into the story whenever the main characters need a ride, so keep a lookout for them. As the plane gets closer, Imhotep goes full Kazekage and summons a giant sand face to take them down. Okay, so people gush about the Sandman scene from Spider-Man 3, and while it is amazing, I don't think The Mummy gets enough credit for really setting the foundation for that scene. For a 1999 film, I think this looks pretty good. As Imhotep is drowning them in the sand, in desperation Evie kisses him, causing him to lose focus for just long enough for the plane to escape, but eventually succumbs to the damage and crashes.
I love the whole sand wall trick. It was beautiful, you bastard.
Rick, Ardith, and Jonathan survive, but Winston doesn't make it and is swallowed up by some quicksand. After making their way to the temple and finding the pharaoh's treasure room, Imhotep resurrects his priests to slow them down. They fight their way to the statue where Rick reignites the spark of his bromance with Ardith and delivers a love bomb to the zombies. Meanwhile, Benny has weaseled his way into the treasure room and tries to leave with a nice amount of it, but his greed gets the better of him and he goes back in for a second helping. Rick and Jonathan finally manage to dig out the Book of Amun-Ra, but with the zombies closing in, Ardith sacrifices himself to give his best bro time to save his girl and take out the mummy. In the ritual chamber, Imhotep uses the Book of the Dead to bring back Anaxunamun's soul into her corpse and prepares to kill Evie to seal the deal, but stops when he sees Jonathan with the gold book. Unable to open it without a key, Jonathan devises a plan to get it from Imhotep. While he's distracted, Rick springs into action to save Evie by killing all the lesser mummies. After reading an inscription on the book's cover, Jonathan accidentally summons some stronger soldier mummies who Imhotep orders to attack and kill Rick as Evie gets caught up with the Anaxunamun. Despite some fancy swashbuckling from Rick, he gets overwhelmed, but with an assist from Evie, Jonathan manages to finish the inscription and stops them from killing Rick. He then commands them to kill Anaxunamun, which they do with a great callback to the film's opening. Enraged, Imhotep attempts to kill Jonathan, but Rick swoops in for the save. For the most part, Jonathan has been used as a comic relief, but I like that they give him a chance to shine here by swiping the key from Imhotep, using his established pickpocketing skills. Before getting choked out, Evie opens the book and reads the incantation that takes away Imhotep's immortality. Going in for one more round, Rick fatally stabs Imhotep, causing him to step back into the moat of souls to be dragged back down into the underworld. His final words being,
Death is only the beginning.
Because of Benny's greed, he triggers a booby trap and causes the tomb to sink further into the sands. With everyone making a break for it, Benny is slowed down by the extra bag of gold he tried to get and falls behind. He almost makes it out with Rick, but is too slow and gets trapped. Despite everything he'd done throughout the film, Rick still tries to save him, but that aforementioned comeuppance finally comes around as Benny is left alone, surrounded to be eaten by the scarabs. Just barely making it out, the three turn around to see the whole city go up in smoke, or sand. They get one last jump scare from Ardith, who made it out and shows his appreciation and respect for helping defeat Imhotep. Jonathan complains that they're leaving empty-handed, but Rick disagrees by kissing Evie, which turns out is a double entendre because they also got Benny's gold. They ride off into the sunset, and that is a wrap on the mummy. You get it? Because they wrap them up when they die. You know? Oh, okay, you know what? I'll stop.
Oh, I hate mummies.
Due to political unrest, shooting the mummy in Egypt became more trouble than it was worth, so the production moved to Morocco and subsequently to the scorching and oppressive heat of the Sahara Desert, where most of the filming was done, totaling 17 weeks of work for the cast and crew. When the film finally released, audiences loved it because of the sense of fun and adventure it exuded. During my rewatch for this video, it felt more like Uncharted and Tomb Raider than the actual Uncharted and Tomb Raider movies ever did. This is Universal, so of course a sequel was immediately greenlit, hoping to ride the momentum of a positive audience reaction and a strong box office, which is how we ended up with The Mummy Returns just 2 years later. I purposely didn't talk about the score in the first movie because I wanted to save it for this one. I regret not mentioning the music in Jurassic Park videos, so allow me to rectify that now. While Jerry Goldsmith did a fantastic job composing for The Mummy, Alan Silvestri dials it up to 11 for The Mummy Returns, with a score evocative of the Indiana Jones trilogy composed by the legendary John Williams. I can't play that music because YouTube will send this video to the copyright Shadow Realm, but everybody saw Endgame, which means everybody heard Portals, so you should be somewhat familiar with his work. In a big move, Stephen Sommers managed to get The Rock on board in the role of the Scorpion King. While pro wrestlers were no strangers to Hollywood productions, The Rock, aka Dwayne Johnson's soiree onto the silver screen, helped jumpstart his acting career, which remains as strong as ever 2 decades later, and opened the door for wrestlers like Dave Bautista and John Cena to become future Hollywood superstars. And speaking of The Rock, the film opens with the Scorpion King leading an invasion of a foreign land during his quest to conquer the world. And although his skills as a warrior are fearsome, they aren't enough for a successful campaign, and he and his army are sent packing into the desert. Being the sole survivor, he makes a deal with the god Anubis to do his bidding in exchange for his soul were Anubis to spare his life. Anubis accepts and creates the Oasis of Am-Sher and gives the Scorpion King command of his army to lay waste to his enemies. Once finished, he takes the soul of the king, leaving behind his prized bracelet, washing away his army with the sands of time, which brings us back to where we left off with the O'Connells. And I say the O'Connells because Rick and Evie are married now and they have a son named Alex. They brought him on an expedition with them in search for the Scorpion King's bracelet of Anubis. Since we last saw them, there's been a bit of an ideological switch between the two. Rick is a little more grounded and cautious when he can be, now that he's a father and a husband, as where Evie is more adventurous and thrill-seeking. The skepticism she showed in the previous film has been replaced by open-mindedness, as she believes that she's lived a previous life in Egypt before, evidenced by lucid dreams and the fact that she knows her way around this ancient temple. However, some of their old traits still remain, characterized by the way Evie tap dances around the room full of bugs, while Rick just steps right through them on their way to the bracelet. Their son Alex is a combination of both of them, inheriting Rick's courage and Evie's intelligence. These traits are put to the test when the temple is entered by 3 thieves who are also looking for the bracelet. I don't know their names, so they're just going to be the Three Stooges 2.0. Rick and Evie find the bracelet but miss the booby trap warning label on the chest, causing a torrent of water to come rushing throughout the temple. They almost end up drowning, but thanks to the paranoid stooge kicking the scaffolding over, Alex has to jump onto one of the pillars, causing them to domino effect in a callback to when Evie did the same thing to the bookshelves in the previous film. A fortunate side effect of the temple's destruction is that one of the pillars hits a wall and saves Rick and Evie from a wet grave. So we shift over to the destroyed Hymenoptera, where some sort of cult for Imhotep has dug up the books of the dead and Amun-Ra and are currently digging up Imhotep's body, spearheaded by cult leader Hafez and a woman named Mila who looks incredibly similar to Anck-su-namun, once again portrayed by Patricia Velasquez. The Stooges show up and it's revealed that they were hired by the cult to retrieve the bracelet of Anubis for some nefarious purpose. After telling the cult where the bracelet is, they head to London to retrieve it themselves, being watched over by Ardith. In London, it's evident that the wedding gift they got from Benny paid off big time, as we see that the O'Connells are absolutely stacked and are living in a mansion. As kids are prone to do, Alex's curiosity leads him to put on the bracelet, and he's hit with the vision of seemingly incoherent Egyptian locations before landing on Karnak, and when he tries to take the bracelet off, it latches itself to his wrist. We've talked about how Rick and Evie have grown and changed over time, but if there's one character who remains consistent throughout this franchise, it's Jonathan. We catch up with him showing off his big rod to some broad when he's ambushed by the cult looking for the bracelet. Still up to his old tricks, Jonathan tries to bullshit his way out of the situation after being confused for Rick. Then the real Rick barges in on the predicament. Downstairs, Hafez's enforcer Lochna creeps up on Evie and Alex looking for the bracelet when Ardith emerges to help. These two clearly have a prior beef that I wish was more explored and fleshed out in the film, but maybe they explained it in the animated series, I don't know. All hell breaks loose when the group start to fight and shoot at each other, with Evie in particular putting up a fight proving that she's not the helpless librarian she was before. Unfortunately, she gets knocked out trying to protect the bracelet and gets kidnapped. Rick and Jonathan make a dramatic exit from their shootout and run outside just in time to see her getting hauled away by the cult. Rick can't control himself after seeing Ardith for the first time in years, but with no time for an entanglement, they track Hafez back to the British Museum while getting a shock that Alex still has the bracelet on as he explains his vision. Ardith reveals that once the bracelet is on, they have 7 days before the Scorpion King returns and resummons the army of Anubis to destroy the world. But if someone can kill the Scorpion King, they would take command of that army, which is why the cult wants to resurrect Imhotep. Once arriving at the museum, Rick and Ardith strap up when Ardith notices that Rick's tattoo is a symbol of the Magi, beckoning him to accept his destiny as a warrior, which Rick waves off. Inside, they see Hafez resurrecting Imhotep with the cult as Evie wakes up. When they finish, Imhotep emerges from the embalming, partially regenerated. The mummy returns.
He said it! He said it!
He sees Mila, who introduces herself as the reincarnation of Anck-su-namun. Lochna and Hafez then open the chest to see that the bracelet has been replaced with a statue, a switcheroo pulled off by Alex earlier, leading Lochna to deduce that he has it. When the cult is about to roast Evie as a sacrifice, Rick makes his heroic entrance and saves her as Ardith provides cover fire. Imhotep recognizes Rick, so it's nice to see that their rivalry is still intact. Before escaping, Imhotep summons the soldier mummies from Hymenoptera to kill them. Freaking out from the gunfire, Jonathan accidentally breaks off the key in the car and has to improvise an extraction transport by bringing around a double-decker bus. With the soldier mummies in hot pursuit, they chase the group all over the streets of London, destroying property and the bus alike, before finally getting team blasted away thanks to Evie's sharpshooting and Jonathan's wheelman abilities. Once the dust is settled, the cult kidnap Alex and raise a drawbridge to keep Rick and company from chasing them. With the taillights in the distance, Rick and Evie are left distraught. Juxtaposed with Imhotep and Mila reveling in their seemingly inevitable victory, there's a clear parallel between their gain and Rick and Evie's loss. After realizing that the cult can't hurt Alex because they need the bracelet to show them the next step after Karnak to the Scorpion King, the group head over to Cairo to get some air transportation from yet another old friend of Rick's named
Izzy! Oh, my lucky stars! A Negro!
Hoping for a plane, the group end up getting a modified hot air balloon called the Magic Carpet in exchange for Izzy getting his hands on Jonathan's big rod. While traveling, Ardith's fellow Magi will be gathering their forces in case they need to combat the army of Anubis should they arise, and with that, the race is on to Karnak. Meanwhile, Alex has been brought onto the cult's train to meet Imhotep, where the mummy tells him that if the bracelet doesn't reach the temple in Amsher within 7 days, the bracelet will kill the person wearing it, pretty much forcing Alex's cooperation. Speaking of getting killed, the Three Stooges get duped into stealing Imhotep's chest of sacred jars and are dumb enough to open it. So guess what comes next?
He's about to get his soul sucked.
Imhotep gives them the old Gok Gok 5000 and leaves them drier than a Popeye's biscuit, regenerating back to full power. Alex sneaks through a hole in the train and darts off into Karnak, but his escape is interrupted when the bracelet shows him the next destination, allowing Imhotep to catch up. That night, he uses water and sand to craft a model of the next stop on the journey, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for his parents. Over on the magic carpet, Ardith is still pestering Rick about embracing his destiny as a Magi, which Rick continues to scoff at as Evie starts to have a daydream/hallucination about the past at the same time that Imhotep is showing Mila a vision of her old life. Two women are having an exhibition fight in front of an audience including the Pharaoh and Imhotep. It turns out that the two women are Anaxunamun and Evie's previous incarnation, daughter of the Pharaoh, Princess Nefertiri, and there's evidently some animosity between the two. Later that night, Nefertiri sees the entanglement between Anaxunamun and Imhotep from the opening of the first film from a different perspective. As she sees her father get murdered, Evie in the real world has a drastic reaction to her vision and jumps off the ship before being caught by Rick. Mila is left in a trance as she relives unaliving herself when Imhotep uses the Book of the Dead to put the soul of Anaxunamun into her body, effectively reviving his love. In the first film, he needed to be in Hymenoptera and make a human sacrifice to pull this off, so I'm not quite sure how he danced around that here. Anyway, Evie realizes that her visions are actually memories from her life as Nefertiri, which Ardith instantly believes, attributing her relationship with Rick as her protector to destiny. When Rick calls it a coincidence, Ardith drops the most fire line in the whole movie.
There is a fine line between coincidence and fate.
Now listen! That's called motherfucking bars, nigga! You know nothing about that!
The next day, they arrive at Karnak to save Alex, but the camp has already been abandoned. However, they do find the clue he left, giving them their next destination for the journey. They follow clue after clue for days with the Magi army trailing thanks to Messenger Falcon Horus. Their latest stop leads them to a canyon where they unknowingly get bottlenecked by Imhotep, who apparently is a water type and uses surf on their magic carpet. It's super effective despite Izzy's best efforts to get away as the tidal wave brings them down. Fortunately, they all survive and end up exactly where they need to be in the oasis of Amsher. Unfortunately, however, Lochna shoots down Horus before he can deliver the location to the Magi. Not one to leave his bro hanging, Ardith agrees to press on for Alex before going back to the Magi. And while Izzy is distracted fixing the ship, Jonathan swindles his big rod back where it belongs. So there's this scene in Jurassic Park 2 where the characters are traveling through some tall grass and get ambushed by raptors, resulting in most of the background characters getting killed, and I can't help but feel like The Mummy 2 took a little inspiration from that, because that's exactly what happens here, but rather than raptors, they have to contend with pygmy mummies. While Evie and Jonathan lay down some cover fire, Rick and Ardith make their way through the pandemonium. Rick swoops up Alex with a trademark save as Ardith and Lochna have a chance to settle their score. Unlike last time, Ardith comes out on top, and right when he's about to get point blanked, Jonathan gets a rare moment to shine as he takes out the would-be shooter, freeing Ardith to go help the Magi. Informing his father that they have mere minutes before the bracelet kills him, Rick runs as fast as he can with Alex to the temple and just barely makes it before the sun hits, with Evie and Jonathan pulling up from behind. Having reached its destination, the bracelet finally releases Alex. Their small moment of relief is short-lived when Anaxunamun suddenly stabs Evie in the stomach, clearly remembering their hostility from a lifetime ago. As she and Imhotep head into the temple, Evie lays dying in Rick's arms, asking him to take care of their son. Letting out a final "I love you," the love of Rick's life dies, leaving him emotionally devastated. While heading towards the Scorpion King's chamber, Imhotep has his powers drained by Anubis, forcing him into a fair fight without any supernatural abilities. With a final kiss to Anaxunamun, Imhotep runs off to face the Scorpion King. Meanwhile, Hafez has taken the bracelet into the temple and puts it on, sticking it into a hole in the wall, which awakens the army of Anubis. Thanks to Ardith, the Magi are waiting and ready. Wanting to avenge his wife, Rick goes inside just in time to see Hafez have something in the wall tear the flesh from his bones. Outside, Alex realizes he can use the Book of the Dead to bring back Evie, so he and Jonathan hatch a plan to take it from Anck-su-namun. While Jonathan distracts her, Alex will read the revival inscription inside. Back in the chamber, Rick and Imhotep have an intense fight going blow for blow as each seeks vengeance against the other for their past transgressions. Deadlocked, the two of them manage to make enough racket to wake up the Scorpion King, who, if I'm being honest, looks like a hot CGI mess. The statement gets overused, but in this case, he really does look like a PS2 cutscene. Having learned from Benny, Imhotep pretends to be a servant to keep the Scorpion King from killing him, then subsequently turns him on Rick. As the Magi and the army of Anubis clash, Ardith does his best to keep them at bay while Rick tries to figure out how to take down the king. With the same assist Evie gave to Jonathan in the first film, Alex finishes the inscription as his mother is brought back to life to settle her beef with Anck-su-namun. Between Ardith and Lochna, Rick and Imhotep, and now with Evie and Anck-su-namun, this movie definitely has a thing about rivalries. I don't know if it's thematically relevant, but it's just something I noticed. The two women get into it, and with Evie being a little extra peeved about being Assassin's Creeded, she edges out Anck-su-namun and manages to cut her face, causing her to run into the chamber where Hafez gets hung out to dry by Imhotep. Meanwhile, the Magi seem to have won their battle with the army of Anubis, only to realize that an even bigger wave was coming, leaving little to no hope for survival. Still on the run, Rick sees an ancient depiction of a man with his tattoo extending Jonathan's big rod into a spear and impaling the Scorpion King, sending his skepticism about destiny through the window. Rick screams at Johnny on the spot to fondle his big rod, and when he does, he tries throwing it, but it's caught by Imhotep, who then himself tries hurling it at the Scorpion King but gets intercepted by Rick. And after a fancy tuck and roll, he uses the erect spear to penetrate the Scorpion King, causing he and his army to bust all over the place. After climaxing, the temple begins to rumble and fall apart, causing Rick and Imhotep to fall into a demon mosh pit, just barely hanging on. Despite Rick pleading with her to leave, the newly revived Evie puts it all on the line, dodging the falling rubble to get to her husband and pulls him up. Imhotep begs for Anck-su-namun to do the same for him, but rather than doing so, she runs away. Despite being the antagonist, the Mummy is really Imhotep's story in the same way that Infinity War is Thanos'. We've seen how far he's willing to go for his unconditional love of Anck-su-namun, and while that love is established within the first 2 minutes of the story, the rest of it is filled with Rick and Evie falling for each other as we, the audience, come to know how and why two people will go to these extreme lengths to save each other. And even though he does come back as a superpowered cadaver to seek vengeance on a world he feels has wronged him, the one person who mattered more than any of that literally leaves him hanging. And you can just feel a shred of empathy for him as he calls out her name in pain. There's no point in world domination if the person you're doing it all for just proved that her love wasn't unconditional. And with that epiphany and nothing to live for, he lets go, tumbling back down into the underworld. Anck-su-namun takes a page out of Benny's book and runs away in cowardice, but remember what we established about people getting their comeuppance? The O'Connells run outside to see that the entire oasis and temple are being swallowed up and head to the top for higher ground. With nowhere left to run, the situation seems hopeless until Izzy pulls up in the repaired magic carpet. They just barely manage to get away, but not before Jonathan makes off with a giant diamond. As they leave, Rick receives a final salute of gratitude from his best bro, once again riding off into the sunset with his family, never having to deal with another mummy again. Well, they would eventually, but first we gotta turn back to Sands of Time.
Good Lord. Are you going to kill me?
Maybe later.
In a similar vein to The Mummy, The Mummy Returns was met with a strong box office and audience reception, despite so-so reviews from critics, but was enough for Universal to capitalize on the star power of The Rock by giving him his own spin-off prequel set a couple thousand years before the time of the pyramids. Though his role in the previous film was limited, The Rock left enough of an impression with the studio that they greenlit The Scorpion King before The Mummy Returns had even wrapped filming, all while he was at the height of his wrestling career as the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. As a kid, I used to watch SmackDown religiously, and I remember The Rock kinda just disappeared for a few months and all the other kids at school would speculate on where he was. Little did we know that he was getting his acting career off the ground with his first leading role. Although directed by Chuck Russell and not Stephen Sommers, Sommers would stay on as a writer and producer while The Rock got his feet wet. He'd stay in that position throughout the Scorpion King's 4 direct-to-DVD sequel movies that I do not have the capacity to watch. Maybe one of them explains exactly how Matthias went from a heroic handsome devil to a warmongering bloodthirsty bugman. If anyone knows how, leave a comment below and let me know, because yeah, I ain't watching all that. But what I will watch is the opening of this film, which starts off with Matthias rescuing his brother from some goons that kidnapped him. You can see that Vince McMahon, as an executive producer, definitely has some influence in the fight choreography throughout this film, because every now and again, you see someone pull off a move straight out of WWE. After the rescue, Matthias and his Akkadian brethren are hired as mercs by a rebellion to assassinate the sorcerer of a warlord, Memnon, who's been conquering all of the neighboring kingdoms as the strongest warrior of the Eastern Horde, which by law makes him de facto king. The sorcerer can see into the future and give Memnon a competitive advantage in battle, so the idea is to take them out and even the odds for the rebellion. Despite pleas from the rebel prince Takhmet, they agree to kill the sorcerer. When the Akkadians sneak into the camp, they're ambushed by the Horde soldiers, where Matthias manages to escape while the other two get shot up. When he finds the sorcerer, it's revealed that she's actually a sorceress named Cassandra, played by Kelly Wu, causing Matthias to hesitate on finishing the job. But he doesn't have a lot of time to think, as the Horde floods the tent and he gets pinned down. It turns out that Prince Takhmet betrayed the Akkadians, and to prove his loyalty to Memnon, decapitates his own father, wanting to join the winning side. When Memnon brings in Matthias' dying brother, he kills him right in front of Matthias. He's next on the chopping block until Cassandra stops Memnon, claiming that he can't kill the would-be assassin or command anyone to kill him without contradicting her vision. So, as a workaround, the next day Memnon has Matthias buried in the dirt next to a horse thief he met the night before near several pillars of fire ants. After escaping and knocking out the guards, he agrees to save Matthias as long as he can tag along with him, which Matthias reluctantly agrees. With vengeance for his brother on his mind, the two head for Memnon's stronghold, the city of Gomorrah. You know, the one from the Bible where nothing bad ever happened ever? Using the horse thief as a distraction, they manage to enter the city, where Matthias gets his money stolen by some kids and then offers one of them some of it to help him get inside the palace. While hiding from the guards inside, they run into an inventor played by Bernard Hill, who's working on a formula for gunpowder. After ascertaining Memnon's location, Matthias prepares to assassinate him, but is stopped when he sees that the kid is caught with the money Matthias paid him. Assuming that the boy was a thief, Memnon orders Prince Takhmet to chop off his hand. Caught between wanting to avenge his brother and saving this kid he indirectly put in danger, his conscience gives out and he shoots the axe away, and quickly gets off one more shot before failing to hit his target. Needing a quick escape, he heads back to the inventor's room, where he uses a catapult to launch himself into the next building over, landing in a room full of Memnon's concubines as they fawn all over him. I low-key wish he would have looked at one of them and just said,
"Shut up, bitch!"
While he's distracted, they poach his weapons and call the guards over. He manages to fight his way out, but has to jump down into the building below to escape, where he crash lands right into Cassandra's bathroom as she springs from the water like a sexy jack-in-the-box.
Easy, easy, big fella.
Taking advantage of the situation, he drags her down into the drain, where they escape through the sewers and come up through a well. He kidnaps her at knife point as they make their way out of the city. Catching up with the horse thief and his camel, Matthias' plan is to use the sorceress as bait to draw Memnon from his palace so he can kill him in the Valley of the Dead, the place that they're headed. Memnon has his top goon Thorak take a group of soldiers to track down and kill the Akkadian and retrieve Cassandra. Taking it personally, he gives Thorak an arrow laced with scorpion venom to inject into Matthias. Later, Cassandra tries to escape but is stopped by Matthias. When she explains that she's been Memnon's prisoner for almost her entire life and that she saved Matthias that night because she thought he could get her to freedom, he feels sorry for her and actually does free her, giving her the choice to stay or go her own way. She does end up staying, and the next day, they spot the soldiers and Matthias uses the cover of a sandstorm to start picking them off and draws them into a booby-trapped cave where he kills all of them save for Thorak, who he then fights back outside and impales in the stomach. Before he dies, Thorak stabs Matthias with the poisoned arrow, causing him to fall to his knees. After the storm, Matthias emerges from the sand like the absolute Chad he is, but quickly succumbs to the venomous arrow and passes out. Cassandra uses her sexy jutsu as an antidote to the venom and heals him. When he wakes up, Matthias uses a messenger hawk to send Memnon a fuck you, enraging the warlord, causing him to accelerate his invasion plans. They stumble onto the inventor who's perfected his gunpowder formula in an oasis, but get captured by the rebellion and are brought to their camp, which is being led by the Nubian warrior Balthazar, portrayed by the late Michael Clark Duncan. He and Matthias had an unpleasant encounter earlier in the film, so the two don't particularly like each other, and it comes to a head when they start to fight one another in the camp. After beating Balthazar, Matthias gives an impassionate speech regarding Memnon's brutality and vows to stand against him should he attack, earning the respect of Balthazar and the people. That night, Cassandra has a vision of the camp being attacked by Memnon, with everyone being slaughtered in the invasion, including Matthias, who she sees being kicked off a ledge and shot in the back by an arrow. She tells Matthias about what she sees, but he isn't worried, due to his belief in making his own destiny. I guess free will is a turn on for her because he gives her the old scorpion stinger, but she must not truly believe in it because she takes the camel in the middle of the night to go to Gomorrah and face Memnon and keep the camp from being invaded. Waking up and realizing what happened, Matthias, Balthazar, and the others gather together to save her and take out Memnon. Cassandra pops back up in Memnon's place claiming she escaped and gives a false vision of his impending victory over his enemies, but his perception leads him to see right through it and see that she was lying and lost her powers, making her useless to him. But before he can kill her, Matthias swings in to the rescue as the rebellion sneaks into the palace. Matthias and Memnon cross swords, and for the first time in the film, Matthias seems outmatched as he gets absolutely worked by Memnon. Meanwhile, outside, Balthazar and the rebellion fight off the palace guards as the horse thief and inventor set dozens of bags of gunpowder underneath the palace to explode, but get stopped before they have a chance to ignite them. As the guards swarm the room, Memnon takes Cassandra as a hostage to escape. With an assist from Balthazar, Matthias hawks him down and they go in for round 2. Memnon manages to set his swords on fire for a cool sequence and uses the sparks to blind and disarm Matthias. As Memnon goes for the kill, Matthias springs up and gives Buddy the business, knocking the sonic rings out of Memnon. But in a bitch move, Memnon sweet chin musics Matthias in the back, launching him into a table. Cassandra realizes this is the part of her vision where she saw Matthias get shot and tries to save him, but he sees the archer and swings back around to keep the arrow from hitting her, taking it himself. Elsewhere in the battle, Balthazar manages to kill Prince Takhmet but gets surrounded by more and more guards. The rebellion also gets surrounded, and out of desperation, the horse thief says fuck it and lights the gunpowder, causing the palace to explode. Matthias, who survived the arrow, in one final moment of badassery, pulls it out of his back and loads it up onto a bow, defying destiny, and lets it fly right into Memnon's gut as the palace explodes, knocking him into the fireball below. The Horde soldiers below see their former king fall to Matthias, and by their laws, declare him the new king. Now the new head honcho, the future seems bright for Matthias and his kingdom, ushering in a new era of peace. For the time being, anyway.
Remember, Nubian eyes will be watching you, Scorpion King.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
I guess there's a sort of mini theme about the future not being set in stone and choosing your own fate, which gives an added dimension to his inevitable clash with Rick, who kind of had the opposite thing going on, but this movie was definitely more focused on fun and action than thematic through lines. Which is fine, however, I think it absolutely could have benefited from Stephen Sommers' direction, but this movie's shortcomings undeniably pale in comparison to the next and final entry.
Why am I laughing?
I don't like this movie. It's not terrible, but it doesn't come close to the quality of its predecessors. Every long-running franchise you can think of has its duds, and just like Fallen Kingdom is to Jurassic Park, the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor is to The Mummy. It's only made worse by the fact that the plot has little to nothing to do with any of the previous entries, making it seem like more of a distant cousin and less like a younger sibling. The Mummy and The Mummy Returns had a perfect 2-movie arc for the O'Connells, and this movie unnecessarily tries to add more to their story, and to put it nicely, it falls flat. If you're new to the channel, I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about things I don't enjoy, so we are gonna turbo through this thing, but I will touch on some positives real quick. Brendan Fraser brings that trademark Rick O'Connell yeehaw energy to the film, which was desperately needed, so he's great. Michelle Yeoh, as always, brings a sense of grace and elegance to everything she does, so she's great. And Maria Bello, who replaces Rachel Weisz as Evie, does about as well as anyone could hope to do coming into a third installment of a trilogy, and to the movie's credit, it handles the transition very well.
Is the Scarlett O'Keefe character really based on you?
Honestly, I can say she's a completely different person.
But that's about where the praise ends and the nonsense begins. So like the previous installments, this film picks up in ancient times, but rather than Egypt, we're looking at China now. There's this brutal warlord they call the Dragon Emperor trying to conquer all of China, and once he does, he has the Great Wall of China built on top of his conquered enemies and curses them. Fearing his own mortality, he learns to harness the power of the elements and summons a witch named Ziwen to teach him the secrets to eternal life. He sends his best friend General Ming to find her, and the two fall in love, much to the Emperor's dismay. He considers this a betrayal and has Ming executed in front of Ziwen and stabs her, but not before she places a curse on him and his soldiers. A couple thousand years in the future, we see that the O'Connells are trying to embrace normal civilian life. Post-Mummy Returns, they apparently did some work for the Allies during World War II, but still have that itch for adventure. Alex is all grown up now, and just like his parents, he's into archaeology and exploring and discovers the Dragon Emperor's titular tomb. After he and his professor are attacked by a mysterious woman, they successfully manage to get the Emperor to Shanghai, the same place the British government had requested Rick and Evie go to return the Eye of Shangri-La. They all meet up at Jonathan's Egyptian-themed nightclub, appropriately called Imhotep's, where we see that there's a lot of tension between Rick and Alex. The next day, the O'Connells go to the opening of Alex's exhibit, where we see that the professor is actually working for the bad guys whose goal is to revive the Emperor using the Eye. Alex and the mysterious woman from earlier named Lynn catch wind of what's going on and drop in for a rescue, but the Emperor is accidentally revived with the Eye. After a shootout, they chase the Emperor through Shanghai and pick up Jonathan en route. After escaping, the group is formally introduced to Lynn, where she informs them that the Emperor is going to try to find Shangri-La and drink from the pool of eternal life to raise his army by placing the Eye on top of a golden tower. The only way he can be killed is with a special dagger. They need an aircraft, and this is a mummy movie, so of course they hitch a ride from one of Rick's old war buddies named Mad Dog, who drops them off in the Himalayas. They fortify their defenses as the Emperor and his lackeys head up the mountain to terminate the O'Connells. After another shootout, Lynn calls down some Yeti from the mountain to help them. The Yeti take out most of the soldiers, but not the Emperor, who manages to get the Eye on the tower, revealing the location to Shangri-La. He then tries to kill Alex by throwing a sword at him, but he's saved by Rick, who shoves his son out of the way. Obviously he's gonna be alright, but it just seems rather redundant to have him snatched from the jaws of death when the same thing already happened to Evie last go round. The Yeti save the group from an avalanche and take a badly wounded Rick up the mountain to Shangri-La where he can be healed. Inside a cavern they find Ziwen, who as it turns out is Lynn's mom, not having aged a day in thousands of years. Her father being General Ming. She uses water from the pool to save Rick's life, and later on he and Alex reconcile their differences, making their family whole again. Unfortunately, the Emperor shows up and bathes in the pool, restoring his powers as he transforms into a three-headed dragon and kidnaps Lin and steals the dagger. There's an obvious get up on the Hydra's back joke in here somewhere, but this movie is already kind of a joke, and it always goes for the low-hanging fruit anyway.
Yacked! Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
They have Mad Dog chase the Emperor back to his tomb, where he revives his army and prepares them for world domination. Once they cross the Great Wall, they'll be invincible, so while Rick and Evie defend the wall, Zi-Wen resurrects the armies of the Emperor's fallen enemies buried within it, including General Ming. So they do a big CGI monster match while Alex rescues Lin, and the Emperor and Zi-Wen fight each other, resulting in Zi-Wen being fatally stabbed so she can grab the dagger from him. Before dying, she gives it to Rick as he and Alex try to use it to kill the Emperor. During the fight, the dagger is broken in half, and while 1v1ing the Emperor, Rick distracts him long enough for Alex to sneak from behind and stab him with one half while Rick goes in from the front with the other, the killing blow indicative of their newfound unity or something, I don't fucking know. But with the Emperor defeated, his army reverts to dust, and the fallen soldiers can now rest peacefully. The O'Connells and Lin return to Shanghai, where we can assume that they all lived happily ever after, but we'll never know because despite making decent money, the film was panned by both critics and audiences, giving a bitter end to Stephen Sommers' trilogy and leading the Mummy IP to needing a fresh start.
You murdered him. You shot me. You tried to kill me. You even went after Jenny. You shot me 3 times.
Yes. Because it's not part of the universe established by Stephen Sommers, I'm not going to talk much about the 2017 reboot starring Tom Cruise, but this review/retrospective thing wouldn't feel quite complete if I didn't at least touch on it a little bit, so that's what I'll do here. This film was actually meant to establish its own dark universe to compete with the likes of the MCU and the Monsterverse, but because of this film's failure both critically and commercially, the whole project was put on ice. Yeah, I know about the Book of Amun-Ra being in the movie, but I think that was an Easter egg for the fans and not concrete evidence of a shared universe. After watching this film for the first time recently, it's not as bad as everyone pretends it is, so it sucks that we'll probably never get to see more from the dark universe. It's been said ad nauseum, but the film's biggest problem was that it spent a little too much time trying to set up a shared universe and not enough time just being its own thing, and as a result, the plot felt a little disjointed and the pace slowed to a crawl once the characters are introduced to Prodigium. Honestly, I wish the movie revolved around Amunet and her descent into darkness because that story seems exponentially more interesting than the one we got. Imagine being a beautiful woman and making a pact with malevolent forces and a voice in your head is urging you to kill your family, kill your family, kill your family, kill your family, kill your family. Also, I know he's a controversial figure, but I really feel bad for Tom Cruise because he really tried to make this movie fun. I think he was ultimately let down by a lackluster script and shoddy direction. Well, I hate to end this on a sour note, so instead, let's rank the films to see where they stand. In fourth, we have The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, a film made maybe a few years too late and could have benefited from a better script. I went back and forth on second and third, but in third, we have The Mummy Returns. It's a fun film with great characters, but between the reincarnation subplot and the Magi subplot and the Scorpion King subplot, it was a little all over the place and seemed to lack focus in certain areas, but I still really enjoyed it. Surprisingly, in second is The Scorpion King. I wouldn't have said that a month ago, but upon revisiting it, I can't help but feel like it brought that same sense of fun and adventure that The Mummy Returns did, only with a tighter plot. It also gets bonus points for putting me on to Godsmack, who did the banger I Stand Alone for the soundtrack, and for introducing The Rock as a powerhouse in Hollywood. And finally, as if there were ever any doubt, The Mummy sits firmly in first place. It's one of my favorite adventure movies of all time. It got me into Egyptology and let the world know that there was still a ton of room for these types of films to flourish. Universal caught lightning in a bottle and tried to recapture some of that magic with some of their other monsters with films like Dracula Untold, the Wolfman reboot, and more recently with the Invisible Man reboot, to mixed results. In spite of a lackluster finale, what Stephen Sommers and his team managed to do with this universe and these characters they created is nothing short of commendable. What it did for me and my interest in cinema, music, and even art cannot be understated, and I will be forever grateful. And with the Mummy buried right now, who knows what the future holds for any upcoming projects, but what we do know is that death is but the doorway to new life. Death
is only the beginning.
Okay, that was a long one, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for spending your time watching my stupid little video. If you would kindly like and subscribe or leave a comment to please the algorithm overlords, that would be super cash money of you. To keep up with my tomfoolery, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and if you want, you can find me over on Patreon, where I swear I'm gonna try to be more active. Links in the description. And with that, I'm Josh Fleeks. Till next time, y'all be easy.